The words came out of her mouth like a desperate prayer thrown into the wind, the kind of sentence that didn't belong in ordinary conversations, the kind that made the air feel heavier the moment it was spoken. She stood there in the fading afternoon light beside a quiet pasture, her hands clasped tightly as if holding together pieces of a life that had begun to fall apart. When she said she needed a husband by tomorrow, it sounded impossible, absurd even. But the look in her eyes told a different story. It was the look of someone standing on the edge of losing everything. Before we dive deeper into this emotional story, take a quick second to support the channel. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected connections, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who might need a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. The first time I saw her, she didn't look like someone asking for miracles. She looked calm, composed, even slightly distant. She stood on the other side of the wooden fence that separated the dirt road from my small farm. Behind her stretched wide fields of green grass where my cows moved lazily under the cloudy sky. To most people, my place looked ordinary. Just a quiet farm outside the city with a modest barn, a weathered farmhouse, and land that had been in my family for generations. But to me, it was everything. It was where I had rebuilt my life after losing the one person who once made that house feel full. She had arrived in a car that looked far too polished for a place like mine. It sat awkwardly on the gravel road like a visitor from another world. When she stepped out and walked toward the fence, there was hesitation in her movements, like someone who had rehearsed a difficult sentence 100 times but still feared saying it out loud. I remember noticing the small details first. The way her hair had been tied back carelessly, as if she'd been too busy worrying to fix it properly. The faint exhaustion under her eyes. The way she kept looking at the ground before finally meeting my gaze. It didn't take long to realize that whatever had brought her here wasn't simple, sick. At first I assumed she was lost. People sometimes wandered down that road by mistake while trying to find the main highway. But she didn't ask for directions. Instead, she looked around at the fields, the barn, the quietness of the place, and something in her expression softened, almost like she had found exactly what she had been searching for. And then came the sentence that changed everything. She explained in a trembling rush of words that her life had suddenly become a maze of deadlines, obligations, and expectations she never wanted. Her father had passed away a few months earlier, leaving behind a large family estate and a complicated will that none of them fully understood at first. Only recently had the truth come out. According to the document, ownership of the land, the house, and the family business would legally transfer to her, but only if she was married within a very specific time frame. If not, everything would go to a distant relative who had already made it clear he planned to sell the land, tear down the house, and erase every trace of the life her father had built. At first, she thought the condition was ridiculous, something from another century. But lawyers had confirmed it again and again. The clause was real, and the deadline was tomorrow. Her voice had grown quieter as she told the story, as if each word carried more weight than the last. She had spent weeks trying to find a solution. Friends had tried to help, but no one wanted to jump into a legal marriage overnight. Strangers online had turned the situation into a joke. Even some family members had told her to give up. But she wasn't ready to let go of the place where she had grown up. The place where every memory of her father still lived in the walls. By the time she finished explaining everything, the sky had started to turn pale gray, and a cool breeze moved through the tall grass around us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I had lived a quiet life for years. After losing my wife in an accident, the world had shrunk down to routines and responsibilities. Feeding the animals, repairing fences, keeping the farm running. People often assumed loneliness would crush someone eventually, but the truth was more complicated. Sometimes loneliness simply becomes part of the landscape, like the wind moving through empty fields. Her request didn't just sound unusual. It sounded like the kind of decision that could flip two lives upside down. But as she stood there waiting for an answer, I realized something else. She wasn't asking because she wanted a husband. She was asking because she was out of options. The fear in her eyes wasn't about marriage. It was about losing home. And maybe that was the moment something inside me shifted. because I understood what it meant to hold on to the last piece of something you loved. The next few hours passed in a strange blur of conversation and quiet reflection. She explained every detail she could remember about the legal situation. I told her about my life on the farm, about the years that had shaped the person I'd become. The more we talked, the more it became clear that we were two people who had both lost things that once defined us. She had lost the safety of her family. I had lost the person who once filled my home with laughter. By evening, the sun had disappeared behind the hills, and the farm was wrapped in that familiar silence that only rural places know. The kind of silence where every small sound feels amplified. The creak of wooden boards, the distant call of birds settling for the night, the slow rhythm of animals breathing in their stalls. That was when I finally gave her my answer. If she truly needed a husband by tomorrow, then there was only one condition. She would have to come live at my place. Not because I wanted anything from her, and not because I expected some perfect version of marriage to suddenly appear between two strangers, but because if we were going to do something this serious, it needed to be built on honesty. No pretending, no fake appearances, just two people helping each other survive a storm. The look of relief on her face in that moment was something I'll never forget. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. Oh, it was quiet. Like someone who had been holding their breath for weeks and had finally exhaled. The following morning felt surreal. We drove to a small courthouse in the nearest town where a tired clerk processed paperwork with the kind of casual indifference that made the situation feel even stranger. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. Just signatures on forms and a simple acknowledgement that two lives had just been legally tied together. But something unexpected happened in the days that followed. Instead of awkward silence or regret, life slowly began to rearrange itself around our unusual decision. She started helping around the farm, learning things she had never imagined doing before. Feeding animals at sunrise, repairing small things around the house, cooking meals that somehow made the old kitchen feel warm again, and in return, the house began to feel less empty. At first, we treated everything like a temporary arrangement, a legal solution to a complicated problem. But as weeks turned into months, something deeper quietly began to grow between us. Not the kind of love people write about in fairy tales, but the kind that grows slowly through shared mornings, honest conversations, and the realization that someone else is standing beside you when life becomes difficult. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment to support the video. Like it, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and let us know in the comments how this story is making you feel. Because the truth is, life rarely gives us perfect plans. Sometimes it gives us unexpected choices. And sometimes those choices lead us exactly where we were meant to be. Months later, when the legal battle over her father's estate was finally settled and the property officially remained in her name, she returned from the city with documents in her hands and tears in her eyes. She had won. The house her father loved would stay in the family. But what surprised her most wasn't the victory. It was the realization that she didn't want to leave the farm anymore, because somewhere between feeding cows at sunrise and repairing fences under the afternoon sun, that quiet place had started to feel like home. And maybe the strangest part of all was this. Neither of us had expected that the marriage we entered out of desperation would become something real. Before we reach the ending, I have a small special request for you. Please comment the word "hope" below if you believe that life sometimes brings the right people together in the most unexpected ways. Years later, when people ask how we met, the story still sounds unbelievable. A woman who needed a husband by tomorrow. A man who offered his farmhouse as the only condition, but sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most meaningful endings. And on quiet evenings, when we stand together by that same wooden fence overlooking the fields, it's hard not to think about how close both of us came to walking away from that moment. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness, courage, and second chances can change everything. Because sometimes the life you were meant to live begins with a sentence that sounds completely impossible. Red. The first winter after that strange courthouse marriage arrived quietly, like a test neither of us had prepared for. Snow began to settle across the fields, covering the green pastures in soft white silence. The farm slowed down the way farms always do in winter when mornings grow darker and the work becomes heavier. The wind pushed against the old farmhouse windows, and the barn creaked through the cold nights like it had done for decades. Life there had always been simple for me, predictable even. But now there was someone else moving through the house, someone whose presence had begun to change the rhythm of everything. In the beginning, we both treated the situation like a temporary agreement that had simply stretched longer than expected. The marriage had served its purpose. Her father's estate had been saved. The legal condition had been satisfied. On paper, she no longer needed me. But strangely, she never left. She kept finding reasons to stay another week, then another month. Sometimes it was because she wanted to learn more about running the farm. Well, sometimes it was because the city suddenly felt too loud after getting used to the quiet fields. And sometimes I think she stayed because something inside both of us had begun to shift in ways neither of us fully understood. Winter has a way of forcing people closer together. When snow blocked the roads and icy winds howled across the fields, there were long evenings inside the farmhouse where conversation replaced silence. At first, those talks were simple, stories about childhood, memories of people we had lost, small things that had shaped our lives. But slowly those conversations began to dig deeper. One night, during a storm that rattled the windows and knocked out the electricity for hours, we sat near the fireplace with only the glow of the flames lighting the room. That was the first time she told me the full story about her father. He had been a stubborn man who believed family should be built on loyalty and responsibility. The strange marriage condition in his will had confused everyone, but as she spoke that night, she admitted something she had never said out loud before. She believed her father had written that clause because he was afraid she would spend her entire life alone. She had been so focused on building a career and taking care of responsibilities that she had forgotten how to let people get close. The will, strange as it was, might have been his strange way of pushing her toward building a life with someone. When she finished telling the story, the fire crackled softly between us, and the room felt heavier with unspoken thoughts. I didn't tell her then, but something about those words stayed with me long after that night. Because the truth was, I had also been living half a life. After losing my wife, I had convinced myself that the safest way to live was quietly, without expecting anything more from the future. The farm had become my world, and I had stopped imagining anything beyond it. But now there was someone else there, someone who had started filling empty rooms with laughter again. Spring eventually returned to the fields, melting the snow and bringing the farm back to life. The grass grew greener, calves were born in the barn, and the mornings carried the warm smell of fresh earth. Life moved forward the way it always does in the countryside. But something unexpected was happening alongside that change. People in the nearby town had started noticing us. At first it was small things, neighbors waving as we drove past, shop owners asking how the farm was doing. Then came curious questions about how we had met. The story always sounded unusual, and every time we told it, people reacted with the same mixture of disbelief and quiet amusement. But over time, the town stopped seeing us as two strangers caught in a strange situation. They started seeing us as a couple, and strangely, neither of us corrected them anymore. Months passed, and one evening something happened that changed everything again. She returned from visiting her old family home in the city with a quiet expression I had never seen before. There was a mixture of sadness and clarity in her eyes, like someone who had just closed an important chapter of their life. She had spent the day going through her father's belongings, sorting through old papers and photographs that had been left untouched for months. Among those things, she had discovered something unexpected, a small letter her father had written, but never sent. It wasn't long, but the message inside it felt like it had been written for the future. In that letter, her father admitted he knew the marriage condition in his will would cause confusion. But he explained that sometimes people only realize what truly matters when life forces them to make impossible choices. He wrote that love doesn't always arrive the way people expect it to. Sometimes it appears quietly, disguised as responsibility or sacrifice. And at the very end of the letter, there was one line that stayed with her. He wrote that if she ever found someone willing to stand beside her during difficult times, She should never let that person walk away. When she finished telling me about the letter, the sun was setting behind the fields, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. The cows moved slowly across the pasture, and the farm felt peaceful in a way that was hard to describe. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. But that silence carried a different meaning now, because somewhere along the way, the strange arrangement that had started with desperation had grown into something deeper, something real, and that realization changed everything. If you stayed with this story until now, it means something about it resonated with you. If you believe that kindness, courage, and unexpected connections can change lives, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who loves emotional stories, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt journeys like this. Life rarely follows the plans we imagine. Sometimes the most meaningful paths begin with choices that seem impossible at the time. As the months turned into another year, our lives slowly blended together in ways neither of us had predicted. The farm became not just my responsibility, but ours. She brought new ideas for improving the land, new energy that made the old place feel alive again. I taught her the things my father had taught me: how to read the weather by the clouds, how to fix broken fences, how to care for animals that depended on us every day. And somewhere between those simple routines, something beautiful took root. The day we finally admitted what we both felt didn't happen in some dramatic moment. It happened quietly, during an ordinary evening when we were standing by that same wooden fence where everything had begun. The field stretched endlessly in front of us, glowing under the soft light of the setting sun. The wind moved gently through the grass, and the farm felt peaceful in a way that only comes when a place truly becomes home. That was when she said something that made my chest tighten. She said she no longer needed a husband by tomorrow because she had already found the one she wanted for the rest of her life. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to support the video. Like it, leave a comment sharing where you're watching from, and share it with someone who believes that second chances can lead to beautiful new beginnings. And before we end, I have a special request for you. Comment the word destiny below if you believe that sometimes life brings the right people together in the most unexpected ways. Because the truth is, that desperate sentence she once spoke at the fence changed two lives forever. I need a husband by tomorrow. At the time, it sounded like a crisis. But looking back now, it feels more like the beginning of a miracle.